My parents humiliated me at my sister's graduation. They joked that I was a mistake compared to my perfect sister, so I shocked them by this. The auditorium was packed with families celebrating their graduates, but all I could feel was the familiar knot in my stomach tightening as my parents made their usual comments. We were sitting in the third row, prime seats that my mom had insisted on getting because her precious daughter deserved nothing less than the best view for her big day. My sister was valedictorian, naturally, and as she walked across that stage in her cap and gown, I watched my parents beam with the kind of pride I'd never seen directed at me. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll give them that. My sister had worked incredibly hard for 4 years, maintaining a perfect GPA while juggling multiple extracurriculars and volunteer work. She deserved every bit of recognition she was getting. But what happened afterward at the family dinner completely blindsided me, even though I should have seen it coming after 26 years of living in her shadow. We went to this upscale steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and prices that made my wallet weep. My parents had invited my aunt, uncle, and both sets of grandparents to celebrate. The entire extended family was there, probably 15 people total, all gathered around this massive table they'd reserved weeks in advance. Everyone was raising their glasses, sharing stories about my sister's achievements, and generally having a wonderful time. Then my dad stood up to make a toast, and I felt that familiar dread wash over me. He started off fine, talking about how proud he was of my sister's accomplishments, how she'd always been focused and determined from a young age. But then he turned to me with this grin that I recognized immediately as trouble brewing. He gestured in my direction and announced to the entire table that it was funny how two kids from the same family could turn out so differently. He said my sister was clearly the planned child, the one they'd prepared for and raised right, while I was more of a happy accident that they'd learned to love despite my tendency to drift through life without much direction. The table went quiet for a moment, that awkward kind of silence where everyone's trying to figure out if they should laugh or pretend they didn't hear what just happened. My mom jumped in with a laugh and added that they'd always joked about having one perfectionist child and one free spirit, like they'd covered all their bases. She said it with that tone parents use when they think they're being playfully teasing but are actually being cruel. My grandmother tried to change the subject by asking my sister about her plans for graduate school, but the damage was already done. I sat there feeling like I was 12 years old again, listening to my parents explain to visitors why I wasn't more like my accomplished older sister. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation, though that stung plenty. It was the way my sister just sat there smiling uncomfortably, not saying anything to defend me, but clearly wishing the attention would move off this particular topic. I excused myself to the bathroom and spent probably 10 minutes staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to decide if I should just leave or stick it out for the rest of dinner. I'd been dealing with these kinds of comments my entire life, but something about having it happen in front of the whole extended family on what was supposed to be a celebration just hit differently. When I came back to the table, they'd moved on to discussing my sister's job prospects, but I could feel the tension still hanging in the air. My uncle gave me one of those sympathetic looks that somehow made everything worse, like I was some kind of charity case who needed pity. I picked at my steak and tried to contribute to the conversation when appropriate, but my heart wasn't really in it anymore. The drive home was quiet, which was unusual for my family. Normally, after big family gatherings, my parents would spend the entire car ride rehashing every conversation and sharing their opinions about what everyone else was wearing or eating or saying. But this time, there was just this heavy silence that felt loaded with unspoken tension. I spent the next few days feeling pretty sorry for myself, if I'm being honest. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, thinking about all the things I could have said in response to my dad's toast. I imagined witty comebacks that would have put him in his place, or dramatic exits that would have made everyone realize how hurtful their comments were. But of course, in real life, I just sat there and taken it like I always did. The thing is, I wasn't actually doing that badly in life. Sure, I wasn't valedictorian material like my sister, but I had a decent job that paid my bills and gave me enough flexibility to pursue some creative projects on the side. I'd been working on this photography business for about 2 years, mostly doing portraits and small events, and it was starting to gain some real traction. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building something that felt meaningful to me. About a week after the graduation dinner, I got a call that changed everything. It was from this gallery owner downtown who'd seen some of my work at a local coffee shop where I'd been displaying a few pieces. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in having a solo exhibition in her space. Not just a few photos on the wall, but an actual show with my name on the invitation and everything. I honestly thought it was some kind of mistake at first. This gallery had shown work by some pretty well-known local artists, people whose names I recognized from newspaper reviews and art magazine features. The owner explained that she'd been following my work for several months after a friend had recommended checking out my portfolio online, and she felt like my style would be perfect for what she had in mind. The exhibition would run for 6 weeks during the summer, which was apparently prime time for gallery shows in our city. She wanted me to put together about 30 pieces, a mix of portraits and landscape work that would showcase my range as a photographer. The opening reception would be on a Friday evening, with wine and cheese and all the fancy gallery opening traditions that I'd only ever read about. I spent the next month preparing like my life depended on it. I printed and reprinted photos, agonizing over every detail of color balance and composition. I drove all over the state taking new shots, trying to capture images that would represent my best work. I stayed up until 3 in the morning editing and organizing, creating this cohesive collection that told a story about the way I saw the world. The hardest part was deciding whether to tell my family about the exhibition. Part of me wanted to keep it private, to have this one thing that was just mine without their opinions or commentary. But another part of me, the part that was still hurt and angry about the graduation dinner, wanted them to see that maybe their happy accident wasn't such a disappointment after all. I finally decided to send them an invitation about a week before the opening. I didn't make a big announcement or try to build it up. I just mailed them a formal invitation like I would send to any other potential attendee, with a handwritten note saying I hoped they could make it if they were free that evening. My mom called the next day, sounding genuinely surprised and excited. She said she had no idea I'd been taking my photography so seriously, and she wanted to know all about how this opportunity had come about. For the first time in a long time, she seemed genuinely interested in something I was doing, asking questions about my process and the themes of the exhibition. My dad was more reserved when he called later that week. He congratulated me, but also made sure to mention that he hoped I wasn't neglecting my regular job to chase after artistic dreams that might not pan out. It was classic him, finding a way to be supportive and discouraging at the same time. But even his lukewarm response felt better than being ignored completely. The opening reception was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a Friday evening in late June. I showed up early to make sure everything was arranged properly, and I couldn't believe how professional everything looked. My photographs were matted and framed beautifully, with little placards next to each one listing the title and price. There was even a small biography about me posted near the entrance, describing my background and artistic philosophy in language that made me sound way more sophisticated than I felt. People started arriving around 7:15, and I was amazed by how many showed up. There were art collectors, other photographers, people from the neighborhood who just enjoyed gallery openings, and even a reporter from the local arts weekly who wanted to interview me about my work. I spent the evening moving from group to group, explaining my artistic choices and accepting compliments that I wasn't sure I deserved. My family arrived around 8 o'clock, and I could see them looking around with expressions I'd never seen before. My sister seemed genuinely impressed, studying each photograph carefully and asking thoughtful questions about my techniques. My parents were quieter, but I could tell they were absorbing the atmosphere and trying to process seeing me in this new context. The real surprise came when the gallery owner approached my parents to introduce herself. She started talking about my work with this enthusiasm that I'd rarely heard anyone use when describing something I'd created. She mentioned that several pieces had already sold that evening, and she was interested in representing me for future exhibitions. She used words like talented and promising, and suggested that I had real potential for building a serious career in fine art photography. I watched my parents' faces during this conversation, and I could see them recalibrating their understanding of what I'd been doing with my time. This wasn't just their son playing around with a camera anymore. This was their son being recognized by someone who made a living identifying and promoting artistic talent. The evening continued with more conversations, more compliments, and more sales than I'd dared to hope for. By the time the reception officially ended around 10 o'clock, I'd sold 12 pieces and had inquiries about commissioning several more. The gallery owner wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss a potential follow-up exhibition in the spring. After most of the guests had left, my family lingered to help me process what had just happened. My sister was the first to speak, apologizing for not realizing how serious I'd become about photography and acknowledging that she'd been so focused on her own achievements that she hadn't been paying attention to mine. It wasn't a dramatic scene, just a quiet moment of recognition between siblings. My parents took longer to find their words. My mom kept walking around looking at the photographs again, as if seeing them for the first time now that she understood they weren't just a hobby. My dad was reading the reviews that people had written in the gallery's guest book, comments from strangers who had connected with my work in ways that surprised even me. Finally, my dad approached me with this expression I'd never seen before, something between pride and embarrassment. He said he owed me an apology for the comments at the graduation dinner and for years of not taking my interests seriously. He admitted that he'd been so focused on conventional measures of success that he'd missed seeing the value in what I was actually accomplishing. The conversation that followed wasn't some magical healing moment where all our family issues got resolved. We didn't hug and cry and promise to do better from now on. But it was a real conversation, maybe the first honest one we'd had in years, about expectations and disappointment and the different ways people can contribute to the world. Over the following weeks, something shifted in how my family talked to and about me. My parents started asking about my photography projects with genuine interest instead of polite obligation. My sister began sharing my work on social media and recommending me to friends who were looking for portrait photographers. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was progress. The exhibition run was successful beyond anything I'd imagined. I sold more than half the pieces, got featured in 2 local publications, and booked enough commission work to consider reducing my hours at my regular job. More importantly, I started to see myself differently, as someone whose creative work had value beyond just personal satisfaction. 6 months later, I had my second solo exhibition, this time with pieces that were larger and more ambitious than anything I'd attempted before. My parents not only attended the opening but brought several of their friends, introducing me as their son, the photographer, with obvious pride. My sister drove down from graduate school just to be there, wearing a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. The second exhibition was even more successful than the first, leading to opportunities I never could have imagined. A wedding planning company hired me to be their primary photographer. A local magazine wanted me to contribute to a feature about emerging artists in the region. I was invited to participate in a group show at a gallery in the state capital. But the most unexpected development came 8 months after my first exhibition, when I received a call from a publisher in New York. They'd seen some of my work online and were interested in discussing a coffee table book featuring photographs of small-town American life. The project would involve traveling throughout the Midwest for 6 months, documenting communities and people who rarely get attention in mainstream media. The advance they offered was more money than I'd made in my entire previous year of photography work. It would mean quitting my regular job and committing fully to this career path that had started as just a creative outlet. It was terrifying and exciting and exactly the kind of opportunity I'd never thought would be available to someone like me. When I called my parents to tell them about the book deal, my dad's response surprised me more than anything that had happened since this whole journey began. He said he was proud of me for taking risks and following my passion, and that he wished he'd had the courage to do something similar when he was my age. He admitted that his comments about me being a mistake had come from his own frustration with playing it safe his entire life. My mom was more emotional, crying a little as she told me how sorry she was for not recognizing my talent sooner. She said she'd been so worried about me not following a traditional path that she'd failed to see I was creating my own path that was just as valid and potentially more fulfilling than anything conventional. The book project ended up taking nearly a year to complete, during which I traveled to dozens of small towns and met hundreds of people whose stories deserve to be told. The experience changed not just my career trajectory, but my entire understanding of what it means to find purpose in work. I wasn't just taking pictures anymore. I was documenting lives and preserving moments that might otherwise be forgotten. When the book was finally published, it received reviews in several national publications and was featured in bookstores across the country. My hometown newspaper did a front-page story about the local photographer who'd made it big, and suddenly I was being recognized in grocery stores and coffee shops by people who remembered me as the kid who wasn't quite living up to his potential. The success of the book led to more opportunities than I could handle. Art galleries in major cities wanted to exhibit my work. Other publishers approached me about additional projects. Photography workshops invited me to teach sessions about documentary techniques and storytelling through images. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from my family. At my sister's wedding 2 years after that first exhibition, my dad's toast focused on both his children and their different but equally valuable contributions to the world. He talked about my sister's academic achievements and her promising career, but he also spoke about my artistic vision and the way my work had helped him see beauty in places he'd never noticed before. My sister asked me to be the official photographer for her wedding, not out of obligation or to save money, but because she genuinely wanted me to capture the most important day of her life. The photographs from that wedding ended up being some of my favorite work, combining the technical skills I'd developed with the emotional investment of documenting my own family's joy. Looking back now, 3 years after that humiliating graduation dinner, I can see how that moment of public embarrassment became the catalyst for changes I never could have anticipated. My parents' thoughtless comments forced me to confront my own feelings about success and achievement, ultimately leading me to pursue my artistic ambitions more seriously than I might have otherwise. The relationship with my parents isn't perfect now and probably never will be. We still have moments of tension and misunderstanding, but there's a foundation of mutual respect that didn't exist before. They've learned to value different kinds of success, and I've learned to communicate my goals and achievements more clearly instead of just hoping they'd figure it out on their own. My sister and I have grown closer as well, bonding over our shared experience of trying to meet parental expectations while also staying true to ourselves. She's pursuing her own unconventional path now, combining her academic background with advocacy work that's more personally meaningful than the corporate track our parents had envisioned for her. The most important change, though, has been in how I see myself and my place in the world. I'm no longer the family disappointment or the accidental child who couldn't measure up to his perfect sister. I'm a photographer, an artist, a storyteller whose work has touched people's lives in ways both large and small. That graduation dinner taught me that sometimes the most painful moments can become turning points if we're willing to use them as motivation rather than letting them define our limitations. My parents' cruel joke about me being a mistake compared to my perfect sister ended up pushing me toward a level of success and fulfillment that neither of us had thought possible. The shock I gave them wasn't revenge or spite, but simply the revelation of who I really was when given the chance to prove myself on my own terms. Sometimes that's the most powerful response to being underestimated, not arguing or defending yourself, but quietly building something so undeniably valuable that it speaks for itself.